Have you ever wondered if a whole country, can actually go broke? Today on The Explainer, we're going to tackle that question by looking at America's massive national debt. But we're not going to use politics. We're going to use a powerful framework from investor Ray Dalio that shows us a pattern that's repeated all throughout history. So let's just dive right in with the number at the center of all of this. $36 trillion. That's the US national debt. Honestly, it's a figure so big it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. But we're going to break down what it really means for the country's financial health. To help us understand it, Ray Dalio gives us this amazing analogy. Think of money and credit as the lifeblood of the economy, right? It's circulatory system. When it's flowing freely, everything's healthy. But when unproductive debt starts to build up, it's like plaque clogging the arteries. And eventually, that can lead to a massive financial heart attack. Keep that image in mind as we go through this. So where does a number like $36 trillion even come from? I mean, it doesn't just appear out of thin air. It's the result of a system that is under tremendous constant stress, year in and year out. Let's look at the basic math. You know, when you boil it all down, the math behind the debt is actually pretty simple. Every single year, the US government spends around $7 trillion, but it only brings in about $5 trillion in revenue. That creates a $2 trillion gap, the deficit, and that money has to be borrowed, which just gets added to that huge pile with national debt. But here's a really important idea to get. Not all debt is bad. There's productive debt. That's like taking out a loan to build a factory that makes enough money to easily pay back the loan and then some. That's healthy. Then there's unproductive debt. That's more like using your credit card for daily expenses you can't really afford. It doesn't generate any income, and pretty soon the interest payments start eating up your budget. The problem is a huge and growing chunk of government debt is falling into that second unproductive bucket. And the thing is, this isn't some new 21st century problem. According to Dalio, what we're seeing is a predictable script, a long-term pattern he calls the big debt cycle that has played out in empires for centuries. Now, we're not talking about the typical business cycle. You know, the recessions and recoveries you hear about on the news. No, the big debt cycle is a massive generational shift. It plays out so slowly over something like 80 years that most of us only ever experience it once. And that's exactly why it's so easy to miss the warning signs until you're deep inside it. So this cycle follows a pretty clear path. It starts with sound money when debt is low, usually right after a big crisis like a war. Then, as confidence grows, a debt bubble starts to form where debt grows way faster than income. Eventually, that bubble pops, and that triggers a really painful period of deleveraging, where the central bank has to step in and print money, which devalues the currency in your pocket. And then finally, the system resets, and it all starts over. Okay, so that's the theory, but here's the $36 trillion question. Where are we in this cycle right now? Well, according to the data, we're getting near that really dangerous part of the curve, what you might call heading for the rocks. History suggests we're in the later stages. And one of the clearest signs that you're in real trouble is when a country gets trapped in something called a debt death spiral. Sounds pretty bad, right? So what on earth does that actually look like? These are the big red flags. But the most critical one, the real danger sign, is when you have to start borrowing new money just to pay the interest on your old debt. That kicks off a vicious feedback loop. The more debt you have, the more expensive it is to borrow, which forces you to borrow even more. And that spiral just gets faster and faster. And we're starting to see a lot of these warning lights flicker right now. Dalio's models, which are designed to track these kinds of financial pressures, are basically screaming red alert. His long-term risk age for US debt is right now at 100%, the highest level it's ever been in the modern era. Now, that doesn't guarantee a crisis is coming tomorrow, but it's like the warning light on your dashboard blinking as brightly as it possible can. And this really highlights the central problem. The economic issue itself isn't impossible to solve. The problem is the political paralysis. It's like everyone on the boat can see the rocks up ahead, but because they're arguing over whether to turn left or right, they can't agree to turn at all, and they just keep heading straight for disaster. So if the boat is heading for the rocks, is there any way to turn the ship? Well, even though it's politically messy, Dalio argues there is a clear, almost mechanical solution to get the country's finances back on a steady course. The first big goal is to get the annual deficit down to a manageable level. Right now, that shortfall is about 7% of the entire US economy. The target is to get that down to a much more stable 3%. So why 3%? Well, it's about confidence. A number that big tells investors your finances are out of control, while a smaller one shows you have your house in order. And the way to do it is a balanced three-part plan. No magic bullet. First, you modestly cut spending. Second, you increase tax revenue. And the third part is the real payoff. Once the market sees you're taking these steps seriously, confidence comes back. Lenders no longer demand super high interest rates. So the government's borrowing costs naturally go down, which helps close the gap even more. And look, this isn't just some abstract theory. This has actually been done before. Back in the 90s, from 1991 to 1998, a mix of spending cuts and revenue increases under both Republican and Democratic leadership slashed the deficit by 5% of GDP and actually brought the US budget into a surplus. It proves that when the political will exists, it is absolutely possible. So we have the problem, and we have a playbook that has actually worked before. Which brings us to the final, and maybe the most difficult piece of the whole puzzle. At the end of the day, this is what it all comes down to. The economic solution is mechanical. You could write the plan on the back of a napkin. But the obstacle, the real roadblock, is political. The math isn't the hard part. The hard part is getting leaders to make tough choices for the country's long-term health, instead of just focusing on short-term political wins. And so, that's where we're left with this final really big question. The historical patterns are clear. The mechanics of the debt are visible for everyone to see. So when a crisis is this predictable, who holds the responsibility to actually act before it's too late? That's what we'll all be watching for. If you found this information valuable, please hit that like button, share this video with fellow investors who might benefit, and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analyses and market insights. We eagerly await your comments below. Let us know your thoughts and what topics you'd love for us to explore.